reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was hungry. The tempter approached and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become loaves of bread." And he said in reply, "It is written, one does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes forth from the mouth of God." And when the devil took him to the holy city and made him stand on the parapet of the temple, he said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and with their hands they will support you, lest you dash your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Then the devil took him up to a high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their magnificence. And he said to them, "All these I shall give to you, if you will prostrate yourself and worship me." At this, Jesus said to him, "Get away, Satan. It is written, the Lord your God shall you worship, and him alone shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus.
Well, of course, thanks to Adam and Eve, we know the difference between good and evil, right and wrong. No thanks to Adam and Eve, we're the ones that have to make the decision between those two. And usually somewhere in the midst of making that decision comes temptation. And you know, anytime we give in to temptation, we kind of give up a little bit of ourselves. It costs us something. A short-term enjoyment can sometimes threaten that long-term hope. Now, I don't eat spicy foods, but how many of us have gone into a restaurant, right? You sit down at a table, and somebody at the table, sure enough, smells, they can smell the cooking, and they read that menu, and they see some food, and I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to order this. And the next day they're walking around with antacids and complaining and about groaning about their stomach hurting, right? I remember when I gave into temptation a long time ago. I think I was 7 or 8 years old. I lived we lived in the suburbs of Chicago. We all had those, kind of like in some of our area here, we all lived in those blocks. Houses were built like that. And 8 blocks meant a mile, and somewhere in that range, there was always this main street. And it had a grocery store and a gas station and some other retail stores. Well, I remember walking down to the 35th Street Pharmacy. In those days, kids were allowed to walk that far alone. So I walked into the pharmacy, and I saw it. There it was, that Milky Way candy bar. 5 sets of wonderful chocolate. I had to have it. And I'm kind of walking around and looking around. Should I? Shouldn't I? And I was just as sneaky as any 7-year-old could be, right? Well, sure enough, I decided I'm going to put it in my pocket. And I walked out the store. And as I was walking home, I'm looking behind me. But I enjoyed it. Sure enough, at home, 2 hours later, the phone rings. And it was the pharmacist calling for my dad. The next week, I spent mopping up and sweeping up the floor of the drugstore after school. Temptation. Like I said, whenever we give in to temptation, we always give up a little bit of who we are. It costs us something. And so often, temptation turns into a challenge. Did you hear the way the devil asked Jesus? If you are the Son of God. In other words, if you don't do this, you're obviously not the Son of God. He went right to the integrity, the stature, the core of who Jesus was. The heart of his question enticed Jesus right to that point of who he was. Jesus had no part of it. He was able to just ignore it. Our basic human instinct is the temptation to protect who we are, right? Or at least who we think we are. Our integrity, our stature, the core of who we are. Well, if you're such a good mechanic, why can't you fix my car? If you're such a good broker, why'd you lose all my money? If you're such a good doctor, what happened with my spouse? If you're such a good friend, why did you let me down? Why didn't you support me? We have just entered these 40 days of Lent. 40 days where we take some time to deepen and strengthen our relationship with God and even kind of look inside ourselves. In biblical terms, the idea of 40 is a test or a trial. Moses spent 40 days at Mount Sinai. Noah spent 40 days in the ark. It took the Israelites 40 years to find the promised land. And Jesus spent 40 days in the desert. No matter how much we are tested or we are put to the trial, somewhere in the midst of it, we find ourselves giving into temptation. And the temptation is no different than what the devil offered Jesus. Self-preservation, wealth, and power. Self-preservation, wealth, and power. C.S. Lewis once said, if you haven't resisted temptation, you don't know how strong it is. Now, how do we do it? How do we make sure that we are pushed back? We push away from those gifts and we understand that those gifts the devil offers us have nothing to do with our relationship with God. Nothing at all to do with him. Well, it's simple. The same path Jesus took. That simple path. God does not abandon us. Jesus knew that. Jesus knew that. When we are aware of our weaknesses or the temptations that might be coming at us, we are also aware of the strength and the grace that God gives us. They go hand in hand because we know it. I once heard it said that Catholic guilt is grace fed to us by the Holy Spirit. It makes sense. So as we proceed through these 40 days of Lent, let's let that grace of God enter into us and remind us of that gift that God gives us. And our true hope, our you hope to one day be at the table with Jesus in the presence of a loving God? Please remain seated.